Chris, and welcome to another episode of Daniel's Deftly Digital. This week we'll be talking about microservices and your enterprise, and perhaps more importantly, where they may not be of value to you. This conversation is coming on the heels of a discussion I had last week with a friend who works for a supply chain company. His company makes a product which they then pass through distributors, and it gets distributed out from there. Now, their product, occasionally they change the packaging, occasionally there's some variations to it, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of disruption in this industry. It's pretty static. The revenue and market share is mostly based on customer brand loyalty, not new channels, not new products, new solutions to sell. So not a lot of disruptive innovation going on. Maybe if the paradigm shifted, maybe if there was some direct to consumer requirements, that would change. But for now, it's mostly just legacy, kind of B2B file sharing with EDI documents. As a result, because there's not a lot of innovation, there's not a lot of disruption, there's not really a need for hyper-reactivity and to be constantly changing their applications to react to new business demands. There's not a need for a lot of elasticity, and because it's system to system, there's not a big customer experience requirement either. So just a little background before we hop into the story. My friend, his company just recently bought 2 new data centers, set up a colo, and they're migrating some of their applications over there. So that right there might tell you a little bit about the company and their values, right? They're buying data centers, they're focused on acquisition of technologies and CapEx. They're not focused on SaaS services or moving their applications to the cloud or anything along those lines. He was tasked with changing their MFT flow, basically migrating that over and modernizing it in the process. He's part of a small 5-man team. They don't have a lot of agility. They don't focus on DevOps, things of that nature. But this change would start to embrace a little bit of that. And more importantly, the enterprise architecture digital transformation, which we're saying because it's a one and done. It has a start and a stop. It's not part of a larger evolution process. It's a very simple digital transformation case that has some well-defined business outcomes. By doing the changes, which would basically be to automate some of the onboarding process and to allow some self-enablement for users, basically the ability to come in and check where my file is on those system-to-system transfers. Has it been completed? Has it been processed? Things of that nature. They would free up a lot of resource time. So say they say 40 man-hours a week, that is basically one resource that's free to build new integrations, to focus on new line of business requirements. So there is a really tangible ROI as part of that. So the MFT migration, it made a lot of sense. And as part of the conversation, he said, and I'm also looking at taking our monolithic backend application and breaking it down into a series of microservices. To which I said, why? And he said, well, microservices are great, right? They allow us to be more agile, they allow more scalability, they allow this, that, and the other. And I said, okay, but what is the value to you as an organization? What benefits do you see from adopting microservices? And to drill down into this a little bit more, I want to kind of cover a use case that touches on the complexity and kind of maps it back to that 5-man team he has so that you can make a decision about whether or not it would be the right choice for him and his enterprise. So for this use case, we're going to imagine a single legacy application that's front-ended by an API. This API feeds into a message queue, which then distributes the traffic to 4 separate applications. But there's a problem. Sometimes one of the applications becomes unresponsive, as you can see by this red line here. When that happens, the retries start to stack up on the message queue, filling it up and preventing traffic for the other applications from being put on the queue. To resolve this issue, the solution owners decide that it would be best to break that single message queue down into 4 separate queues, as you can see here. Now, if application 1 stops responding, as shown by the red line, it doesn't back all the way up to the API. What ends up happening is that single message queue fills up, but the other 3 applications continue to work just fine. This breakdown, this decomposition of the single queue into 4 message queues could be considered your first step into microservices. You've taken a larger service and decomposed it down. Now at this juncture, it's still fairly easy to manage. You're dealing with 4 instances of the same type of message queue. Updates, upgrades, patches, configuration and management. It's the same across these 4 separate items, and it's probably still fairly easy to manage and maintain. Having seen the value of decomposing the message queues, it seems like a good idea to tackle the legacy application next. By breaking it down into separate microservices, we have the ability to be more reactive to the needs of the business. Maybe it's to add a field. Maybe it's to scale out certain pieces of it that are utilized more frequently. So the legacy service is broken down into 3 separate microservices. Here's where things start to become a little bit of a challenge. By breaking all these pieces down, we now need to manage the code in separate repositories, maybe within GitHub. So as you can see here, we now have 4 separate GitHub repositories that are being used to manage the code for these 4 separate components. Now, from there, we have all these microservices, and they don't live on a single place like the traditional monolithic architecture did. So we have to add in some new tools to manage and maintain these. Maybe Docker, Kubernetes, Istio, Helm. So we bring a fair amount of knowledge requirements to the table to manage and maintain these new microservices. On top of that, because the architecture has changed, we need to start building in some CI/CD, some automation, things of that nature. Maybe we need to put a new north-south gateway in front of these microservices. Maybe we need to do some more alerting because we've broken things down. There's no denying the potential benefits of microservices, but I have to ask you viewers, in the case of my friend's enterprise, is it the right choice? Remember that culturally, his organization likes to buy, build, and maintain, because there's not a lot of requirements for hyperreactivity to respond to disruption in his industry. Furthermore, by decomposing the environment, he ends up with many pieces. He has a small 5-man team. How many people could be assigned to each one of those pieces if he were to break it down? Finally, there were success criteria that were stated as part of this digital transformation project to free up the time of resources to work on other projects and opportunities. If he increases the complexity of his environment so much, will he actually be able to meet that goal? I hope you learned something today, and I hope that if you look at implementing microservices and that architecture within your enterprise, you stop and ask, is it the right thing for me? Culturally, as far as business outcomes go, is it in line with what I'm looking to try and achieve?